Good evening and welcome. This is Face to Face. In today's world, diplomacy has become more important than ever. From renewed conflicts to shifting power dynamics to the volatility of the global landscape, countries have really come to a point where they have to rethink how they deal with each other, not just regionally, but also globally as a whole. What we're seeing right now is a world in transition. The balance of power is changing, alliances are shifting, as well as the role of diplomacy that we used to know as a more traditional one has by now shifted as well. Well, to help us unpack the deepening importance of diplomacy in this turbulent era, I'm very pleased to be joined this evening in our studios by Mr. Nilanthan Niruthan, Executive Director for the Center for Law and Security Studies. A very good evening, Nilanthan. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's our pleasure. Nilanthan, let me start off this conversation by asking you, given the uncertainty and the conflicts that we have been witnessing in the global stage, as well as the volatility that we are seeing, why exactly has diplomacy become such an important factor?
Well, because as you rightly said in your introductory remarks, we are living in a world in transition. So since the Second World War, many countries have really come together to establish and abide by a world order where there were some shared values in terms of internationalism, in terms of a world community, and even realigning our trade policies based on that. But unfortunately, the shelf life of a system like that typically tends to be quite limited, because you have some people who benefit greatly from it and some people who suffer greatly from it. And what we are seeing now, this realignment, so to speak, is this dissatisfaction being expressed. And as you said, this means that countries like us, but almost every country in the world, all of them need to recalibrate how they look at the world, how they understand the world, how they choose to navigate through world politics. So, for instance, there's a very strong argument being made, and I do subscribe to that argument as well, that the world is becoming and will become extremely transactional rather than values-based. What do you have to offer? What do I have to offer? What can the two of us work out based on our mutual strategic interest? Now, ironically, even though many people are shocked by this is how the world always functioned before the Second World War. The last 75 years have witnessed an unprecedented time in human history, where countries came together to say, we will regulate each other through laws, we will regulate each other through institutional bindings. But what we are entering now, a period of mercantilism, so to speak, is, I would argue, the natural state of humanity. So this makes the role of diplomacy even more important, because it makes our ability to assert ourselves and our ability to negotiate in our interests an even more important skill than it was before.
Also, Nilanthan, now a story that was making headlines right around the world was the very recent Iran-Israel conflict that President Donald Trump dubbed the 12-day war. And that showed us how fast things can escalate. Does this mean that the traditional way of avoiding war through diplomacy is no longer as effective as it used to be?
Well, I would say that the traditional way of avoiding war through diplomacy has never really been an effective technique. When countries have the power to take what they want by force, they typically tend to find a way to do it. There are instances where diplomacy has prevented larger powers from going to war with each other. But in terms of them grabbing what smaller nations have, I wouldn't say that diplomacy has played a huge role, even over the last 75 years in terms of preventing that. But as you rightly said, if we were to look at this as a chessboard, it's very, very important that we understand what the pieces are, how those pieces move, what exactly the value of each piece is, what each piece brings to the table, and so on, what our options are. So in that sense, yes, but diplomacy as a tool should always be used as a versatile instrument rather than a specialized instrument. As in, it cannot just be seen as a conflict prevention tool. It should be seen as a toolkit, if that makes sense.
And also, let's talk about Sri Lanka, what exactly we can do in this largely evolving global landscape. What kind of a diplomatic approach can we use in order to survive and become stronger in this largely turbulent landscape?
Right. I mean, so that's a good question. And our major problem is that we haven't completed the first step that needs to be completed before we can have this conversation, which is we have no policy continuity. And this is something that I keep repeating whenever I get a forum, because this is one of our biggest problems over the last 20 or 30 years, which is that we have no party consensus on what our foreign policy objectives are. Therefore, each time a new government comes in, the previous government's foreign policy measures are somehow rolled back or reversed or whatever it is, and we go down on a new path. So over the last 11 years, we've had 5 different presidents, 5 different coalitions, 5 different foreign policies, even if you think about it, right? And this is not healthy for any country. So the first requirement of the day is to get the political parties together to have some kind of, it doesn't have to be extreme consensus. It doesn't have to be some kind of unified all-party document, but if we can just have some understanding across all political parties that A, B, and C are our foreign policy objectives, and X, Y, and Z are the ways in which we aim to achieve these objectives. That itself will raise the quality of our diplomacy infinitely, because our problem right now is not that our diplomats are not capable of getting things done. Our problem is that, as I said, we have no policy continuity and we keep starting over each time a new government comes in. And this really, you could be the best diplomat in the world, but this cripples your ability to get the job done.
Speaking of foreign policy now, we have been constantly trying to balance our relationship, let's say, with China, with India, and with also the West. So from this balancing act, what exactly can we learn? And also, is non-alignment really a good idea for Sri Lanka at this point?
So I've been quite vocal about this, but the typical consensus in the foreign policy analysis domain is that we should stick to non-alignment. I disagree, but the only reason I disagree is because, like I said, we have no policy continuity. So whether it's alignment with China or with India or the United States or even non-alignment, our focus should be on making these things a long-term policy rather than a short-term policy. Because let's face it, the United States is more than capable of helping us achieve great things. India is more than capable of it. China is more than capable of it. And if we have policy continuity, then maybe we can get some from all of them, maybe. But given the fact that we simply don't have that consistency, I don't see how non-alignment would help. And I don't see how that serves our strategic interests in any way, given the multipolar world of today, because these countries are going to treat us transactionally, right? The days where we can assume that we can just outplay everyone else, that we can balance India of China, China of the United States, that we can just keep making each person a promise and then flipping partners, so to speak. I don't see that being sustainable. So policy continuity, policy consistency is our only way out of this.
I also want to talk about President Donald Trump's policy ever since he assumed office this year. He has been making quite a few, very drastic decisions. They have been affecting the entire world, populations, students, immigrants, you name it, they're affected. What do you have to say about President Trump's vision? Yeah,
so I mean, the problem with analyzing Trump is that often the way he does things hides the strategic objectives behind what he does. And some of it is obviously accidental because of the type of person he is, but some of it is deliberate, if you ask me. So for instance, if the two of us were having a meeting with Trump here, he would roll a grenade into the room, wait for the room to explode, and then walk in while the studio was on fire, while you and I were still looking for our scattered arms and legs. That's when he walks in and says, okay, let's start negotiating. That's just the guy's way of doing things, right? And his major macro objective with all of this, tariffs, China, every single policy that Trump has, it's geared towards the objective of re-industrializing the United States. What a lot of analysis often misses out is that over the last, 30 years, the United States has been systematically de-industrialized, with the manufacturing sector taken away to many countries like China, because the assumption was that China would democratize if capitalism was taken to China. The assumption was that because the cost would be low, everybody would be happy. But what's happened is that there are many, many constituencies in the United States that have economically suffered terribly because of this de-industrialization of US manufacturing power. And Trump's ultimate objective is to bring it back. And Trump knows that every country in the world can complain all they want about tariffs and his personality and bullying and the way he speaks and all that. But if he succeeds in bringing manufacturing back to the United States, if he succeeds in re-industrializing the United States, none of these complaints will matter. Because the American machine will be up and running again. And if it wasn't Trump, it would have been someone else at some point of time who had, whom this disenfranchised electorate chose to kind of spearhead a new way of doing things or whatever. So yes, while he's certainly very clumsy and aggressive, and as I said, the type to roll a grenade in before walking into a meeting, there are certain big picture strategic goals that we must be aware of as well.
I also want to now talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, this has been going on for 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. This has changed the way alliances have been formed, how matters have been handled between the two countries. Talk to us about what exactly this reflects about the global organizations that have been established in order to achieve global peace. For example, the United Nations. What exactly does this entire situation tell about those organizations?
Well, what it tells us is that those organizations
aren't as effective?
Aren't effective, not aren't as effective. Aren't effective, period.
Okay.
That these organizations, the joke, you had one job, is quite applicable to the United Nations, to the International Criminal Court, where if we were to pull up their history, we would see that the only countries against whom action has been taken are a handful of developing nations that most people wouldn't even point out on a world map, as I always like saying. And what it shows is that there's a serious credibility crisis that international institutions and the international world order is itself facing. I mean, you mentioned the Israel-Iran conflict, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now look at these, right? Even the Thailand-Cambodia conflict, right? These are all civilizational struggles. They are not fighting over issues that sprung up over the last 75 years. They are fighting over civilizational issues, where the Israel-Iran conflict goes back to the Jewish-Persian armed rivalry over the centuries. With Russia and Ukraine, Russia sees Ukraine as a part of civilizational Russia, whereas Ukraine says, no, we are a modern day nation state, so we can do whatever we want. With Thailand and Cambodia, it's about their shared heritage and which side of the border that heritage actually belongs to.
Would you say the same about the Israel-Gaza conflict as well? Once again, civilizational?
Yes, the Israel-Gaza conflict. I mean, Trump got laughed at for saying that the India-Pakistan conflict was a civilizational conflict, but it is absolutely a civilizational conflict in the sense that, yes, as modern nation states, these may be new, but the root of the India-Pakistan conflict goes way back to the traditional civilizational tension between the Hindus and the Muslims finding a place for themselves in South Asia, given the problematic history. So what Russia, Ukraine, and all these other conflicts also tell us is that we are now living in an era where civilizational values, civilizational rivalries, civilizational issues are the main drivers of conflict rather than, modern day issues.
Also, Nilanthan, now the Indo-Pacific has become a region that is it is a focus of global tension. Now, how exactly can countries located within this region, including Sri Lanka, handle such tensions and also avoid being pulled into global conflicts that can brew up in the near future?
Yeah, so obviously, as a small country, our ability to resist will be limited. Let's say if World War III breaks out, we will be affected, right? There's nothing that we can do to insulate ourselves completely. So I can name three basic things. So from the political side, as I said, trying to bring about some kind of policy consensus, trying to bring about some kind of policy continuity, that I think would go a long way. On the media side, I would say more conversations like this on the big picture, right? Because I often think that one of the things that really, once again, hinder our ability to understand the world is that our analysis can sometimes be very Sri Lanka centric, and we are sometimes like fish that don't really realize the existence of water. So just like how fish swim in water, as you know, you and I swim in geopolitics. Every person, their daily lives is affected by geopolitics in some way. This effect might be invisible like water is, but we're all swimming in it. So conversations on the big picture, like what's the future of energy? What's the future of the UN? What is the future of the world order? These are important conversations that might bore our audience, but unfortunately, these are conversations, that need to be had. And from, let's say, an institutional, let's say think tanks or academic organizations like mine, what we can do is once again join that discourse and create public awareness. So for instance, my organization, the Center for Law and Security Studies, this month, we are about to start a weekly risk assessment, which we're going to make available to both the private and the public sector for a very low cost, where every week you will get an assessment of the major geopolitical events of the last week with a risk categorization of how it might affect Sri Lankan interests. So stuff like this is what we need to do to protect ourselves. Many of us draw comparisons to Singapore, right? And you often hear people saying, oh, Lee Kuan Yew was fantastic because he fought corruption and he created a meritocracy and he brought in the rule of law, and look at Singapore today and all that. Well, one of the things that goes completely underappreciated is the way in which Singapore made geopolitics a part of daily political discourse. So if you look at just normal political discourse in Singapore, geopolitics plays a role in it. The average Singaporean citizen who follows the news is far more geopolitically aware than the average citizen of most other countries. And this was, again, a big reason, in my judgment, a big driver for their growth, because it just changes the way that the general population thinks about these things. And in that sense, I think there is stuff that organizations like yours and mine can do to help this country.
Nilanthan, in today's world, soft power, factors such as education, culture, and even our diaspora, they matter more than ever. Talk to us about how Sri Lanka can strengthen this form of diplomacy.
Yeah, so as you rightly pointed out, strengthening things like cultural outreach, media outreach, artistic outreach, anything non-military, right, is what we should be leveraging right now as a soft power. So as we just discussed a few questions ago, considering that the world is moving more towards civilizational values again, considering that the world is now moving towards cultural perspectives, even when we look at armed conflicts, shouldn't this be an opportunity for us as one of the few true ancient civilizations in the world? There are very, very few countries in the world that have an unbroken history of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years, and we are one of those few. In fact, Lakshman Kadargamar understood this, which is why in his time he tried to create an alliance of Buddhist nations, because he could really see the strategic value in leveraging our identity as a Buddhist nation in regional alliance building. So we would need a visionary like that again to understand that point of view. But the great thing about soft power is that it can be built around almost anything. It can be built around cuisine, it can be built around sport, it can be built around clothing. The whole point of soft power is that it's extremely flexible, right? I mean, look at what pizza and spaghetti do for Italy. And look at the way in which Latin America has really exploited the whole soft power game, the way that they have projected the glamour and vibe, just the magic of Latin American culture. I mean, they've not been able to leverage it financially, as I said, but they've done a great job in terms of exporting their culture, in terms of making their culture look cool to other parts of the world, which is what soft power is all about. That's what Hollywood is all about. That's what India's World Yoga Day is all about. That's what Japan's anime or South Korea's K-pop culture is all about. It's about cultural icons that you possess now being consumed both financially and on a societal level across your borders. And this gives you the ability to project power as well. So yes, there are many opportunities for us in terms of our religion, our civilization, our art, our tradition, our clothing like saris, right? But it all depends on whether we have a long-term plan and whether once we put something in motion, that plan can actually keep churning instead of just being overturned when a new government comes in.
Would you say you're satisfied with the progress that we made as a nation when it comes to soft power?
I mean, in general, it's kind of hard for small countries to project soft power, particularly considering the fact that we are right next to one of the true soft power giants of the entire world, which is India, and considering the major push that India has made over the last 10 years, particularly on soft power, yoga, Bollywood, Indian art. Even though these were already a big thing, over the last 10 years, we've seen the Indian government make a very, very active push in terms of soft power. So the question becomes, are we going to integrate ourselves with that soft power push? Or are we going to position ourselves as some kind of small individualistic alternative? Let's say in something like saris. Saris are a big soft power, tool for India. More than it being a commodity, it's also a cultural symbol that India exports around the world. So is that something where we can plug into it, or would we rather project more of an individualistic image? So in general, it's kind of hard for small countries to do that. So I will be kind to our decision makers and say, yeah, I'll give them a pass on soft power.
So when it comes to smaller nations, Nilanthan, hard power, the military power, is not exactly something that we excel at either. So then if hard power is not exactly the option, and if soft power is also not exactly an option, what is the option?
Well, so first of all, in terms of hard power, there are two types of hard power. There is the ability to protect your own borders from internal threats. And there's the ability to protect your borders from external threats. So you could argue that far from being weak in hard power, we are actually one of the best in terms of internal security, because we are one of the few countries in the entire world that has not only militarily defeated an insurgent group, but we've also maintained more than a decade of relative peace in that area without a return to violence as many people predicted. And in terms of demining and rehabilitation of the soldiers and all that, you could make a case that we've done a much better job on demining and rehabilitation than most Western countries which love to preach, about these things. But yes, in terms of being able to protect ourselves from external threats, or being able to let's say, bully our way into dominance in the region, there's nothing that we can do about it. Which is why we need to once again think very strategically. See, often this is the other problem, right? Are we ready to think like a small nation? We defeated the LTT because we were ready to think like a small nation, understand our limitations, adapt according to those limitations. But I don't see us doing that now in terms of our external threats. Often the security defense conversations can, sometimes go along the lines of why can't we get a warship? Why can't we get some kind of big equipment and all that? But that's not what we need at the moment. We need low cost, high impact technology and strategies, kind of like what the Americans are pushing Taiwan to do. So the Americans are currently pushing Taiwan not to spend too much money on military hardware and to instead just get technology and weapons that suit Taiwanese territory to repel a Chinese invasion. So if our focus is on that, then we should be fine on that sense as well. To be honest, I would say that our lack of economic capacity is a lot more worrying to me than our lack of military capacity. Our lack of military capacity, once we have deeper conversations on how we can modernize the armed forces, that problem will be solved, because I do believe that we have good people in that sense. But with economic policy and foreign policy, unless you have political unity, it doesn't matter how good the people in charge are. It's just not going to work.
Well, we have a lot more to cover on diplomacy. As we know, it's a very broad topic, as you've seen so far in this conversation. We'll try to touch on almost everything related to this topic regarding the world, as well as our motherland, Sri Lanka. But we'll be heading into a short commercial break now. Stay tuned with us. This is Face to Face.
GDP around $30,000 billions, 30,000, but in Sri Lankan context, we are just only 80 billions.
And one of the economic principle also say, with the trade, everybody better off.
Now, why he has reduced 44 to 30? That's what my point is all about, right? He's not playing kind of a trade game with us.
Now only the government, we are seeing that the provincial council election has completed and the people are appointed, but now only the infrastructure projects are being, the money is being deployed.
Face the Nation every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. on TV1.
Welcome back. This is Face to Face. This evening, I'm in conversation with Mr. Nilanthan Niruthan, Executive Director of the Centre for Law and Security Studies. And our topic of discussion is the importance, the deepening importance of diplomacy in this turbulent era. Well, let's get back to what we were talking about. Nilanthan, now I want to talk about, once again, Sri Lanka and diplomacy. In this very divided, but also at the same time, quite interconnected world, what kind of long-term diplomatic and diplomatic vision should Sri Lanka embrace in order to ensure that it also maintains sovereignty, but also is secure as a nation? What exactly can we do to cope with all of this?
Yeah, so on top of the things that I mentioned earlier about the public discourse and the policy continuity and public awareness and things like that, another thing we can do is just once again make sure that we have some direction in terms of the major issues that will confront the world soon. So, for example, AI, right? Do we really have political consensus on where AI is going and what Sri Lanka's place in that journey should be? Have we really thought about the future of energy markets and what our place is in that market? So a lot of this is just common sense. We don't really need to pull off any miracles here. A lot of this is just increased awareness, increased critical thinking, increased common sense, and having a conversation about the larger big picture issues rather than simply the micro small issues.
Now, Nilanthan, wars nowadays, they don't just involve weapons like they used to back in the day. It involves information, technology, influence. How can diplomacy, the concept of diplomacy, adapt to these factors like misinformation, cyber attacks, or even digital propaganda?
So the only way diplomacy can cope with it is by having diplomats who are aware of these things, right? So often what happens is, and this is not something unique to Sri Lanka, by the way. This is not something unique to us. This is something that all countries face, which is that as the world changes more rapidly, you often find the ways of doing things also breaking down. So, for instance, if you look at something like AI, right, and the way in which that can just ruin the relationship between two individuals. These could be individual leaders even. If you look at the way in which, let's say, deepfake technology, right, can be used to make it look like a certain country's taken up a position that it hasn't, or to create some kind of social, disruption, right? Now, diplomats they don't need to be AI experts, but they need to be aware enough to spot the red flags. With something like energy, they don't need to be experts on energy, but they need to know where it's going. So, for instance, let's take an American example, because if we take a Sri Lankan example, we would have to be unkind to someone. So let's take an American example. Okay. Now, look at the clumsy way in which the United States tried to slap those tariffs on China, and then found out that China had a monopoly on critical minerals, and that the United States was not in the same position of power that they thought they were in. Now, this is a lack of good diplomacy. Good diplomats, good experts advising Trump on China should have told him that this needs to be addressed. Right? China's monopoly on this lifeline, which is now going to become a bigger and bigger lifeline as the human population grows. They should have dealt with that before taking up an aggressive stance against China. So bad diplomacy and just lack of knowledge can often do irreparable harm.
I want to circle back to organizations like the United Nations. Like you said, it's not effective at this point. Does this mean that diplomacy has become more difficult, or does this push countries to be more interest-driven in the global stage?
So I would say it requires perhaps a new type of thinking when it comes to diplomacy, because let's face it, right? Diplomats who essentially plied their craft during the Cold War, right? Their worldview and their style of operating would have been very different from, let's say, diplomats who entered the service in the last 20 years.
Yes.
Right? And that's going to change when you look at the next generation as well. So the question is, can the diplomats of any country keep up with the changes in the world, keep up with what's actually going on, and not cling on to their old values because that's what they are used to? That really is the key question here. Do we, or any other country for that matter, have... the European Union has this big problem where many European diplomats, if you listen to their speeches and all that, seem to be living in some kind of alien planet, some kind of parallel universe where they think they can actually compete with the Americans and alienate the Americans and all that. But now almost all of them have had to surrender to Trump's demands to increase their military spending, right? So diplomacy is not just about good communication and relationship building, even though it is that as well. Diplomacy is also about reading the room. And a big part of reading the room is also reading the geopolitical chessboard in front of us. So that to me would be the first and foremost responsibility of any Sri Lankan diplomat. Understanding the current geopolitical chessboard and understanding that things have changed, and that just because things operated a certain way in the past, that is not a guarantee of that trend continuing into the future.
I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that. How exactly has the role of a diplomat changed?
Okay. So, for instance, let's take a country like Sri Lanka, right?
Okay.
I mean, let's just use a vague thing here. So, previously, or at least over the last 70 to 75 years, we had a certain world order into which we had to integrate ourselves diplomatically. So there would be the United Nations, there would be many of these other organizations, sub-organizations, blah, blah, blah. You knew that the world powers had some kind of consensus. These organizations might not work, but at least for the optics, you would get the United States, China, Russia, France, and the UK to come together and pretend that there was some kind of internationalism going on. Whereas now it's almost like even that mask has been ripped out. If you look at most of the UN General Assembly and Security Council resolutions that have been passed and all that, even the people sitting there, when you look at their faces, it's almost like, what are we doing here? You know, the jig is up. Everybody knows that we do nothing here. So the role of a diplomat once again becomes building on a foundational level rather than just building from old. So for instance, there's no SARC anymore. Right? Many diplomats in the past, Sri Lankan diplomats in the past, might have had that as a way of building partnerships, building relationships. But I'm sorry, SARC is dead. Right? As I say, the embalmer's fluid that's flowing through SARC's veins as we speak, you're not going to be able to resurrect it. So you need to find new ways to build alliances. We are now returning to an age of conflict, where once again we had sporadic conflicts break out over the last 75 years between the major powers. Of course, smaller powers have been killing each other consistently even over the last 75 years. But we've managed to somehow create this illusion of a stable world order over the last 75 years, and that's coming down at the moment. So I would say being a diplomat today requires a lot more initiative. It also requires a lot more creativity. Whereas you had systems in place earlier where you simply had to be a professional to do your job, you need to be a bit of a visionary or a maverick right now if you want to actually provide your country with something tangible.
Is the United Nations also about to become another League of the Nations? Would you say that?
I mean, it certainly seems to be heading that way.
Okay.
So, because I mean, I think I brought this up earlier on Face the Nation when we met a month ago as well, right? So just this year, we've had two conflicts, India-Pakistan, Israel-Iran. The India-Pakistan issue was taken to the UN in 1948, or 47 or 48. The Israel question was taken to the UN once again in either 47 or 48. Almost 80 years later, there's still not even a molecule of a solution in sight.
Why would you say that's the case? I mean, the United Nations is highly equipped with all the facilities it needs, all the diplomats they need. But why don't we see a solution yet for all these issues?
I mean, I would say that it's because the UN's job is not to solve world problems. The UN's job is to pretend to solve world problems. And if you have enough of the world population buying into that illusion, then you can keep... Look, I mean, even 5 years ago, in any IR course here, if you had said the UN was useless, many of the kids in the classroom would look at you very angrily because half of them have fantasies of working for the United Nations, right? So the role of the UN is to create an illusion of there being some kind of conflict prevention mechanism. And that illusion lasts only as long as the majority of the people believe in it. And now we're going through a phase where more and more people are starting to see it's like the emperor's new clothes, where you now have an increasing amount of people pointing out that the emperor has no clothes.
We also now have an increasing Sri Lankan population that has migrated overseas to live or to work. What role can our foreign policy, Nilanthan, play in protecting their rights as well as strengthening the ties with our diaspora?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say we need to focus on protecting our rights first and worrying about the diaspora later. They have their own countries and it's their responsibility to safeguard their rights. look, I am once again, in general, very skeptical of things like harnessing the diaspora and all that, because ultimately, no matter how much you try to engage with them as a nation, if they want to give back, they will give back. If they don't want to give back, some of these people are just not going to give back. Some of these people are left for a reason, and they don't want to really be involved with the home country. Some of them are second generation Sri Lankans belonging to different ethnicities who have no real emotional stake even in what's going on in our country at the moment. So yes, diaspora outreach is always good. Bringing in the diaspora and allowing them to be engaged on policy issues here is typically good for any country. So I wouldn't want to be dismissive of it. My argument though is that if we were to go back and look at the data, I would say that especially with the Sri Lankan diaspora, if these guys want to help, they'll help. If they don't want to help, they simply won't. So I don't see much that we can do to kind of coerce them into helping us out more than they already have.
Also now, are we seeing a return to a world where power and interest matter more than law and principles? And how do you think this would affect our world peace? Because there's a goal that we've been striving to achieve for the longest time. And well, just when we think we are making progress, 2025 happened. We've seen so many conflicts happen within this year alone. What exactly does this all mean? So,
I mean, that's an interesting way to phrase it, right? So are we entering an era where power and money is more important than laws and principles? I would say that power and money has always been more important than laws and principles, barring the last 75 years, where the world came together in some form or the other to decide to, I mean, as in the strong nations, made the world come together and created a world order where, I mean, the globalism, globalization, however you want to put it, the theory was that we can create a win-win situation for everybody. And we are finding out that that was a very childish dream. This idea that I could make the lights and you could make the cameras, and I can then sell you the lights and you can then sell me the cameras, and that everybody goes home happy. That was the driving force of the current international economic and political system that we are now, that you mentioned in your introductory remarks, that is now in transition. Because what we found is that no, it's not a win-win situation. There is no such thing in geopolitics as a win-win situation. It's never been a win-win situation. We tried this experiment and we are now slowly discovering that the experiment was a failure. Some people have woken up to that reality. Some people have not. And the sooner people wake up to this reality, the more of an advantage they have over those who have not yet.
Nilanthan, while it's undeniable that diplomacy, once again, which is our topic of discussion, of course, it's of growing importance. But seeing how things are folding out, where do you think we're headed when it comes to diplomacy as the world as a whole, or even Sri Lanka? Where are we headed?
So over the next 5 or 10 years, there might be certain short-term changes in the way that diplomacy becomes more transactional and mercantilist, as I stated earlier, where it's all about what each of us bring to the table and what kind of profitable or strategic agreement we can come upon, as opposed to we are all one world, you need to now do this even if it impacts your interests because it's in the world's interests, right? The US, the American taxpayer was told for what, 50, 60 years now, that even though it's not in the US taxpayer's interest to subsidize Europe's defense, they've been doing this for the last many, many decades because they were told that it's for the collective good. It's for the world's good. And the American taxpayer and Donald Trump is not willing to
do that anymore.
Do that anymore. So that's the direction that we're heading in. In terms of World War III, which people often ask me about, it'll probably start on the information spectrum. As you pointed out, it will be a war there before it becomes an actual hot war.
Okay.
And one of the things we've seen is, look at the first Israel-Iran clashes a few, 2 years ago,
Yeah.
the one a few months ago, the India-Pakistan clashes, and the Thailand-Cambodia clashes, it's almost like, so two countries, they talk a lot, they then exchange some fire, they talk a lot again, they exchange some fire again, this side declares victory, this side declares victory, they both go back and tell their people, hey, we won. This is what happened in Israel-Iran, this is what happened in Thailand-Cambodia, this is what happened in India-Pakistan, where both sides in all of those conflicts, after a few days of real apocalyptic, level threats, they kind of calm down and they go back and they tell their people, don't worry, we won. So this might actually be the new form of warfare, where we have 12-day wars, 7-day wars and all that, where they stay short and both sides claim to be the winners.
But war is always a lose-lose situation for any party involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lose-lose situation for most people, but it's a win-win situation for, let's say, certain business interests
Arms.
and certain, arms companies are one example.
Yes.
Right? So there's a great book called War, What Is It Good For? I think his name is Ian Morris. Everybody should read that book. That book really goes into why war is profitable and why many countries, after they finish a big war, go into a period of huge economic growth. Because for certain business interests, war turns out to be very, very profitable. And as long as you can leverage that, then your economy becomes strong as well. I'm not advocating for war, but the picture is a lot more complicated than we might sometimes think.
Thank you very much, Nilanthan, for sitting down with me for this very insightful and thought-provoking conversation on the growing importance of diplomacy in the global stage, as well as for Sri Lanka. Well, as we've heard tonight, diplomacy is no longer concerning meetings and handshakes behind closed doors. In this rapidly evolving world, given all the factors that have been evolving over the past few decades, so has the concept of diplomacy. And this is what we covered this evening on Face to Face. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Theruni Karunaratne. Take care. Good night.